Thailand is known for many things: food, massages, beaches, and friendly smiles. But there's one thing that is either commonly joked about or remains hush-hush locally. It's the country's sex workers and red light districts. There's a fair share of travelers who visit Thailand specifically because they want to experience this vibrant side of Thai life. But how did it all start? This is where we take you on a journey back in time and tell you the brief history of the Thai sex industry right here on This is Thailand. When waves of U.S. soldiers began arriving in Thailand's beaches during the rest and recuperation or R&R breaks in the Vietnam War in the 60s and early 70s, many poor and underprivileged women who needed to provide for their families saw the economic potential. Many rural residents struggled as a result of a lack of work and low incomes. And as Thailand's population rose in the cities, their financial options declined. As American soldiers began to crowd Thailand's streets and pubs in quest of companionship and physical intimacy, countless impoverished women were forced to choose between searching for low-paying professions or engaging in sex work. Some women opted for the latter option, and even worse, several were even forced into prostitution by their families so they could send money back home and improve their families' finances and status. After many women in Thailand's small towns and urban areas in the 1960s made the choice, sex tourism began to flourish in Thailand, Southeast Asia's fastest-growing economy.
Until now, the enemy has held.
Shortly after the Vietnam War, the sex industry and the consequences of sex tourism took a dark turn. There was a rapid surge in sex trafficking. Many criminal gangs began to explore ways to profit from the demand for sex. It wasn't long before there were numerous cases of kidnapping teenage girls from the rural areas of Thailand. It began mostly in the northeastern of Thailand, the poorest area, where traffickers promised young women genuine jobs, only to fool them later when they became indentured. Then another huge problem appeared, adding to the already tenuous legalities and cultural impact of the industry. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, HIV and AIDS exploded in Thailand. Thailand had to find a solution, and there were a lot of campaigns to try and educate the population about the dangers and avoidance. The use of condoms was heavily promoted and encouraged through public awareness campaigns. It seemed like an uphill battle, but the programs were largely effective. The chances of becoming infected with HIV has now drastically reduced, although it remains an issue in segments of Thailand's youth. According to UNAIDS, new HIV infections peaked in the early 90s. People living with the disease peaked at the turn of the century with an estimated 800,000 infections, and the number of deaths following suit a few years later with an estimated 57,000 deaths a year in the early days. Those stats have since been on a downward trend as treatment availability has increased. In 2020, only about 500,000 people were estimated to be living with HIV in Thailand, with an estimated 12,000 HIV-related deaths nationwide. With the success of the campaigns, the battle against HIV and AIDS was beginning to have positive results. But organized sex trafficking remains a problem. The Thai government's HIV/AIDS Prevention and Control Program encourages all sex interactions to wear condoms. Condom use in sex institutions has increased from 14% in sex acts in 1989 to 94% in 1994, resulting in a decrease in the rate of all sexually transmitted infections, not only HIV. Once the government launched its AIDS education program in 1990, prostitution levels also started to drop, mostly due to the fear of contracting AIDS, while fewer men were less likely to take advantage of them for the same reason. NGOs began their fight against the issue by advocating for new laws that would not only ban human trafficking and prostitution, but also actively strive to track down and prosecute criminals. There were over 80,000 female prostitutes working in 6,095 commercial sex venues in Thailand in 1989, with an average fee of $10.60 per session. However, 5 years later in 1994, there was a drop of 16,000, from 80,000 to 66,000 women working in the field. The price for their services have climbed to $16.30 per hour in related venues such as massage parlors and restaurants. The move to gentlemen's clubs, massage parlors, bars, and even restaurants during the late 1990s and early 2000s represents a gentrification and normalization of Thailand's sex industry. The hubs for the industry also became more defined and started to become semi-respectable international drawcards for the world's sex tourists. Places like Pattaya, of course, Patong, Nana Plaza, and Soi Cowboy in Bangkok, and Bangla Road in Phuket are now well known for their entertainment options. There are also equally vibrant sois or streets for the gay community, usually located the hot zones for bars and nightclubs. As Thailand began to modernize, so did the economy. Many simply couldn't afford to live, and so they turned to prostitution, migrating in large numbers to big cities before returning home with more money than they could realistically make elsewhere. This trend still exists today for those who choose this path. They claim it's the only way they can provide for their families and justify it by sending cash home each month to prove it. In the late 20th century, that's when we started seeing an influx of tourism in Thailand, and the government started investing heavily in promoting Thailand as a tourist destination. One of the most successful campaigns that was launched by the Tourism Authority of Thailand, or TAT, was the Amazing Thailand campaign, which has undergone many variations and taglines until today. The resulting boom in tourism also saw it come with boom in sex tourism as well. It's estimated that today there are in excess of 4 million tourists heading to Thailand for its sex industry alone. Prostitution is illegal in Thailand, although the consequences are pretty minor, and the legislation has plenty of gray areas exploited by operators. Under Section 5 of the 1996 Prevention and Suppression of Prostitution Act, a person who advertises herself or himself for sex could face a fine of up to 1,000 baht. Pimps and gang members are also highlighted in the act. They could face a fine of 20,200 baht and up to 10 years in prison for prostituting women, according to the law. The act also addresses the seriousness of child trafficking crimes. It stressed that anyone found guilty of having sex with minors will face much higher penalties and longer prison sentences. Jail terms range from 5 years to 20 years, with fines from 100,000 to 400,000 baht. These provisions don't include rape, physical violence, or any other serious offenses. If anyone is found guilty of those crimes, punishment can be far worse, including longer prison terms. Once seen as a Southeast Asian haven for pedophiles and traffickers, Thailand now has really cleaned up its act with a long list of prosecutions over recent decades and harsh penalties for those caught. Thailand changed its tactics in its fight against sex trafficking in 2008. The definition of human trafficking was expanded by the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act to also include trafficking for the purposes of labor exploitation and trafficking of male victims. It's all a big step into the right direction. Organizations had been working for a long time to have both genders included in the definition of trafficking, as it wasn't just women being trafficked and abused. In 2018, Gambian Minister Hamad Bah told state media that Western tourists planning to travel to Gambia in search of sex should stay away from his country, saying, quote, "We are not a sex destination. If you want a sex destination, you go to Thailand," end quote. The statement, of course, upsetted Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and everyone living in Thailand, really, prompting him to declare that Thailand will need to change its image of being a sex tourism destination. Foreign Affairs Minister Don Paramat Vinay said he did not believe the Gambian minister's remark would be taken seriously by the international community. The ministry told the media it had told the Royal Thai Embassy in Dakar, Senegal, which also oversees Gambia, to issue a letter expressing dissatisfaction with the Gambian minister's remark, saying it could hurt Thailand's image and Thai tourism. What he says was not in line with the facts. And while that statement was uncalled for and not very nice, I think we have to just all face the music and acknowledge that the sex industry has brought in a lot of money for Thailand, especially among those who lack better employment options. And many tourists travel a long way just to experience the country's red light districts. So, although officials know that much of the transactions are illegal, there's no doubt they'll continue turning a blind eye to the situation. Thailand's reputation for one of the most exciting red light travel options in the world remains secure.